Hello everybody, this is Fun Police, and I am back with a new card review. This one is over the newest World at War, the Battle of the Bulge. We've just gotten all 7 cards revealed, and I just want to go over them and talk and give my thoughts on them. Without further ado, let's just jump it off with the first card, the 989th Infantry Regiment. It is a German limited infantry. It costs 3 credits, has 1 operation cost, 3 attack, 3 health, and then has blitz and deployment if gain or give +2/+2 if this is your only unit. The wording on this is a little weird, but essentially this guy is giving himself +2/+2, so he's essentially gaining +2/+2. So he's a 5/5 if you're able to have him as your only unit. And that's quite strong. 3 credits for a 5/5 Blitz infantry is very, very good. And even a 3 credit 3/3 infantry with Blitz has proven to be pretty good. We've seen with something like 1st Marines, which is the US 3 credit 3/4 infantry with Blitz. And that one sees constant play in U.S. frontline. So the 989th sits a little bit weaker when he's played without the deployment effect going off. However, if you're able to turn him into a 5/5, he gets kind of ridiculous, being able to trade down pretty much any 3 to 4 drop within the entire game. Honestly, the 989 seems very, very strong. The biggest question is, where exactly is this guy going to fit in? It's a bit hard to see him fitting into something like, say, aggro, because they're often playing a lot of units. So how often are you going to be able to actually trigger his deployment effect? I would expect not a whole lot, but control might be where he fits in. They don't generally play a lot of cheap units, so it's pretty realistic to have an empty board as you've just been removing or drawing cards or doing stuff with orders and the first couple turns, and then you, on turn 3 to 4, play this guy down, and you just have a massive blitz infantry that can potentially, kill something in the front line, or immediately start pressuring the enemy with a very undercosted 5/5 blitz. I expect it to probably see play. I think it's very definitely going to be tried within German control. And I think overall it probably is going to have a place somewhere in there. Maybe it's a tech card in some ways, like if the meta is very control heavy, you take these guys to add some extra big sized threats to the game or to your game plan, and you're able to maybe put some more pressure on them. Or maybe it's just good enough as like an anti-aggro tool that can also sometimes pressure the enemy, that it's just good enough to see play all around. I think overall it is quite good. Then we move on to Battery. Battery is a US limited card. It costs 4 credits. It is an order. And then it says, deal 4 damage to target unit. Excess damage is dealt to the enemy HQ. So this is very interesting for a couple reasons. Number one is that this is universal mid-size removal for the US, which is something that they previously haven't had, at least not without like conditions like being random. For example, like Death from Above is a 4 credit destroy a random enemy unit, or you have something like Torpedo Attack, which was 3 credits to kill something in the front line. Battery is able to hit both lines, which is something that we generally don't see on the bigger US orders. And then another interesting thing is that this is additional burn, and the US, although not a burn nation directly, does have many cards that fit into a burn style deck. Stuff like strategic bombing, gunship mission, the cheap blitz units like M18 Hellcat, even something such as the 101st Airborne. These cards all have modest amounts of burn damage, and Battery is further adding to that. I think it is definitely a card that is going to be tried out in pretty much every US deck, and whether or not it sees play, I think depends on what exactly the various decks are doing. US frontline might kind of be scared of spending 4 credits for something that is only essentially maybe killing 1 unit. However, if you can hit a 1-cost unit, then Battery is not only potentially killing an enemy unit, but it's also dealing 3 damage to the enemy HQ, which is a pretty good amount. it could add a nice amount of reach into the deck. And with how many units you have, you're able to do stuff like set up the perfect trade so you get units down to 1 health. And notably, you can even use this on your own units. So something like a useless 30-second infantry that is being played on like turn 6 or 7 could be, in an emergency, used with battery to finish the enemy off. That could be a unique little application for it. On the other hand, Ramp might honestly be a better home for this. Ramp has always kind of had a weird time with its 4-drops. Going from War Machine into something else has always been sort of a weird angle for them. Usually they've wanted to ramp or play a guard, but maybe battery is another way to lean into it. It is removal, so you are being proactive on the board, and if you're using batteries efficiently alongside stuff like your strategic bombings, you could potentially squeeze a pretty high amount of damage out of this. The 3 batteries could potentially be a total of 9 damage to the enemy HQ, while also being removal when you need it. That's a fair amount of burn to add on top of your removal card, so it might be flexible enough that US Ramp actually ends up making this a pretty standard card. It is hard to say, though, because 4 damage does miss out on some of the bigger units, and if you don't have anything to combo it with, battery can sometimes end up being kind of an expensive tactical strike, and not dealing enough damage in order to kill enemies off. So there are some downsides, but I'm interested to see where this ends up. Then we have Bypass. Bypass is a German special order. It is 5 credits, and says deal damage to target HQ equal to the total cost of German tanks in the front line. Now, the card doesn't say this, but it was clarified that this is only for friendly tanks, so if the enemy had a German tank in the front line, Bypass would do nothing. This is definitely a card that I think is more of a fun build-around rather than a serious meta force. It is quite difficult to be able to have several high-cost German tanks in the front line and then spend a whopping 5 credits on top of that. It's a lot of setup, and if the enemy ends up just constantly removing your various tanks, this card can just rot in your hand and do nothing. That being said, this is potentially a lot of damage from a single card. Even one large unit like the Tiger 1E is 8 damage with Bypass. And if you're able to attack with the Tiger, you could be pushing 15 damage in one turn with just the Tiger 1E and a Bypass. Or you could double Bypass and deal 16 damage. It's quite a strong card if you can get it to work. And I don't think that, honestly, it's going to work as a competitive build. German Control would be the only deck that is kind of interested in it, and they do have a fair amount of bigger tanks. The Panzer IIIe, Panther tanks, the Tiger 1E, and a card we're going to get to in a little bit, the King Tiger, all do work quite well with Bypass, and give it enough damage that you could potentially run it. And maybe that is the way that you want to build it, is a German Control deck based around burning the enemy down. I have doubt. I definitely don't think it's going to be a meta deck, but I honestly am pretty excited to try it out. I always like wacky cards and stuff that's more of a for fun theme rather than just purely this is a good card that fits into the meta decks. So Bypass seems like a very fun build around card, although maybe it's not the most competitive. Then we have the 112th Infantry Regiment. It is a U.S. standard infantry unit. It is 1 credit and has an operation cost of 1. It has 1 attack and 2 health, and then it has +2 attack for each adjacent unit. We've actually seen this effect on a unit before, the 26th Infantry Regiment, which was essentially a 4 credit 4/4 with the same text. Or text similar to this, and that card ended up seeing no play. However, 112 does have a small benefit of being a 1-drop, so it's a lot easier to get out onto the board alongside other units, and it can potentially do this a lot quicker into the game, meaning that it can apply a lot more pressure. Being able to have a 5/2 as a 1-drop does look quite scary, and even if you end up only making it a 3/2, that's still a pretty decent stat line for a 1-drop, so there is maybe some potential, as this guy can help you maybe trade in the early game against 1 and 2 drops, or he could maybe, you know, apply a lot of pressure against slower decks. The biggest downside is the fact that, one, he doesn't have blitz or anything that makes him relevant the turn he's played, and two, he's only got 2 health, meaning that he's a slow and relatively fragile 1-drop. So he might be a bit more of a high roll card, and he does go up against steep competition from something such as the 32nd Infantry, the 109th Combat Engineers, and Red Devils, which all are 1-drops that currently see play in US Frontline, and I don't know if the 112th really does enough to overcome those. Maybe there's an application in some other deck. I saw people mentioning something like a Soviet US tokens running him, because you have so many tokens that operate for free that it could potentially make him a little bit easier to use, although he still is quite fragile. So I'm not the highest on this card. I think that he probably ends up just being a bit too slow and doesn't measure up against the other 1-drops from the US, so he ends up kind of being sidelined. The one saving grace might be the fact that he's a really good trade card with like 1-3s or 2-3s, because most of those are more expensive than the 112th. So that might be like one reason he ends up seeing play, but even then I have doubts. So I think overall, not the best of cards. Then we move on to the King Tiger, which is the German elite for the expansion, and this is a big one. It is obviously a tank. It costs 12 credits. It has an operation cost of 4. It is a 10-10, the single biggest stat line we've seen in the game, and it has heavy armor 2, and your support line cannot be targeted by enemy orders or deployment effects. That's quite powerful. Being able to... Now, one thing I should note is that when it says cannot be targeted by deployment effects, so cards that don't target will still be able to affect your support line. Imagine something like the B-17. Its deployment does not specifically target a unit, it just randomly picks one. So that is still able to kill stuff like the King Tiger. When it says cannot be targeted, it means from something like La Decima, or something like the RAF Lightning or the Panzer IV F2, which require you to specifically choose an enemy unit to pick. So the King Tiger has pretty much immunity from those effects at least, and also has some extra benefits from also being immune to orders and protecting your entire line, including your HQ. So your HQ is immune to, like, burn damage from, like, say, Bismarck or the Kriegsmarine or something like that, even though those cards don't see a lot of play. Good examples. The King Tiger, when he's in the support line, is honestly a nightmare to deal with. You're not going to trade down a 10-10 with heavy armor 2 in any efficient manner, unless you're able to, like, instantly kill him with some effect, such as, like, from the Paris C, which could man it, which is probably one of the better ways to remove this guy when he's in the support line. Although he still can be hard to deal with, to interact with. That is quite a powerful effect, and also protects your other units, which does have a use. It is, simply put, he is seemingly a very powerful game ender. However, he is very slow. 12 credits is your entire turn, so you're doing nothing but putting a 10-10 out on the board. That's very slow. On top of that, he is also having that monstrous 4 operation cost. So he costs 8 credits normally to move into the front line and attack with. And on top of that, if you move him into the front line, he becomes vulnerable to orders and deployment effects. So he ends up really, sticking his neck out, and he will die if you put him into the front line. However, I think he's overall going to see play in German control. He's just such a trump card in some matchups. For example, think of something like against like Soviet or British control. Those decks don't always have like hard removal on something like from like a B-17 or something. And the King Tiger is able to kind of sit in the back line and make a lot of their removal not efficient. Stuff like La Decima, which is a very common and powerful card, isn't going to be able to hit them. Orders won't be able to hit them, and they just don't have a way to remove it. And that alone, I think, gives the King Tiger enough power to really kind of throw its weight around. Not to mention, God forbid, you put something like Mare Nostrum on this. That's going to be like the absolute worst case scenario for the enemy. A big 11-11, actually. It's an 11-11 that heals every time he does damage, and you can't target it with deployment effects or orders. How are you going to beat that? But I just think overall this honestly does seem like a fantastic card. Seems very, very strong. Then we have the P47D25RE. This is a US limited fighter. It is 6 credits with 2 operation costs for a 3/5, and it has deployment destroy target enemy unit in the front line. This is a very powerful card, it seems like. We've seen Torpedo Attack, which is a 3-credit order that blows up something in the front line, and that has seen play in something like Ramp. The P47 has that strapped as a deployment effect, and then you get a 3/5 body on top of that. That honestly does seem like it is good enough to see play in Ramp. I don't expect it to really see play anywhere else, but in a deck that can play bigger units quite efficiently, having ways to additionally blow up large units while having more threats honestly does seem quite good. And I expect the P47 to be probably good enough to see play in a full-on ramp deck, but at the very least, it's going to be a very good budget ramp card, which is something I always like to see, is that if a card isn't good enough to maybe see play competitively, it's at least a good budget card, and the P47 I definitely think is an amazing budget card. And the final card of the expansion, the 442nd Infantry Regiment. This is a US infantry. It's a special. It costs 3 credits and has an operation cost of 1. It has 4 attack, 3 health, and then it has ambush and destruction. If it is the enemy turn, add a copy of this unit to your hand. So what this means is that as long as you never trade this guy away on your turn, the 442nd is going to be around for the entire game. That's quite powerful. Having an infinite stream of 4/3 ambush infantry is very, very strong. And it also has ambush, so it's going to be really annoying to trade down. Honestly, this seems like a fantastic card for US Frontline or other US aggressive decks. The grindy nature of it fits very well into that deck while still being able to apply a decent amount of pressure. The one downside is that this doesn't have like blitz or anything, so it's not able to immediately pressure the enemy, but the fact that it's essentially like board clear proof or removal proof means that you can put these guys down in slower matchups and the enemy is kind of unable to deal with it, because if they remove it, you're able to just play it again. So they have a very tough choice of, are they going to waste removal on this to get it out of the front line or something like that. And that's going to be a very strong aspect of the card, I feel like, is just the fact that you can keep playing this guy down. He's going to be able to fight and get into the front line, and if the enemy spends removal on him, essentially you lose nothing. Because you're able to just replay him. So that seems very, very powerful. And I honestly fully expect this to probably end up in US Frontline. Otherwise, that is all 7 cards from the Battle of the Bulge. It releases seemingly in a couple days, so let me know down in the comments below which of these 7 cards is your favorite, which one gets you most excited. And if you have any ideas for decks maybe that I should try out, leave them down in the comments below. I'll have some deck text definitely over these new cards. I would fully expect a bypass deck to come around in the short term, but I also have some ideas for some other ones. But otherwise, I want to thank you all so much for watching. It's always so nice to see you guys always supporting me and just helping me out. I really appreciate it. But otherwise, that's it. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a good day.